Good morning, welcome to everybody. We've got a fantastic stellar audience ahead of us and a panel. I am an engineer in Arup. I run a small digital portfolio focusing on internal efficiencies and how we can do things differently, how we can use technology to change the way we design our own buildings and provide value back to our clients. We've got a panel of housing developers. We've got Nicole, Barry, Steve and Giles, and it's an opportunity now to have a quick introduction. Should we start with Giles at the end?
Thanks. I'm Giles Carter. I'm here representing Ilke Homes. I work for the shareholder of Ilke Homes, also the shareholder of the two companies that came together to form Ilke Homes. So Ilke Homes is a modular manufacturer, volumetric low-rise homes formed by Keepmoat Homes, top 10 UK house builder, and Elliott, which is part of the Algeco Scotsman Group, which is the world's largest provider of modular space. So we're here launching in the UK, Q1 this year, looking to build up to 5,000 homes per year, low-rise residential. Thank you.
Hi guys, Barry Trout from U&I PLC. I'm the Chief Operating Officer, and I stand here naked before you with my 3 months of experience in the property industry, so I'm looking forward to your questions.
Hi, Steve Sanham, Managing Director of Hub. Hub is, we're a mid-market residential developer. We invest social impact money to deliver homes, which we think are for sort of real people. And we've got about 2,500 homes under development across 9 schemes in London and the southeast. My background is, I actually studied engineering as my degree, which is unusual, I think, in the house building world. And I worked for the likes of Urban Splash and Argent before joining to set up a hub 5 years ago.
Good morning, Nicole Bremner, and I'm the founder of East 8 and London Central Developments. They are boutique house builders focused in London, building out about 350 separate units across London at the moment. I'm also personally a PropTech and FinTech investor, so I have an interest in that side of things too.
Thank you very much, guys. So we're talking today about how we unlock value through creativity. Barry, you mentioned you're standing naked here in front of us. What can we learn from other industries and bring across the property industry to kind of create value and creativity?
I think the first thing to realise is that quite a few industries will be ahead of the property industry, but also some will be behind. So I don't think we should sit here and think we're way behind. I think we're actually well on the way to thinking about how to incorporate technology into many areas of the development process in particular. I think the best industry that I can probably reflect on is the Formula One business, in which I spent some time. The way those guys harness technology is quite astonishing, and it's probably one of the most innovative and creative industries that I've had the pleasure to be involved in. And I think the way they do it really is by setting very audacious targets and harnessing brilliant talent around fulfilling those talents in a very short period of time, much shorter than we'd see in the property industry. So, for example, an F1 car would go about 2 or 3 seconds faster around a generic track over the course of a season. The season's only 9 months long. About 80% of the components of that car would change over the course of the season, which is quite astonishing. So the car you see at the beginning of the season is actually nothing like the car at the end. So building those incredibly audacious targets and then setting up the organization with the right people to go for those targets over the year is really what drives the innovation in that industry. And I think property can learn from that by being probably a little more audacious and challenging what the conventional norms are, and making sure that the businesses are set up internally to make sure the right people are in the right place to apply their minds to hitting those targets.
And Giles, your business kind of touches on that in terms of prefabrication and modular. What's new about the prefab that you're bringing to the table?
I think, and a lot of the questions that we get are, we've seen modular before, we've seen prefab. What's different this time around? One of the key tenets of what we're trying to do that we believe is genuinely different is bring world-class manufacturing capability into the construction industry. This is production, not construction. At a very simple level, it's easy to understand why productivity improvements in manufacturing over the last 20, 30 years have massively outstripped construction. How many building sites do we have across the UK? Thousands, 5,000, 10,000? Every one of those sites is an individual factory, if you will, learning, building, starting from afresh. And then finally those units are sold through and occupied, and we start all over again from a piece of land somewhere. Manufacturing, you bring that expertise in to one central or 10 central or even 100 central sites. Every time we build a home, it's better than the last one. Coming back to your point, how do we, that Formula One car getting 2 or 3 seconds better over 9 months? What about the thousands and thousands of houses that we're going to build that get incrementally better every time? What's also different this time, I think, is that we're seeing real investment. We've seen L&G, we've seen Berkeley, we've seen Laing O'Rourke, all starting in the UK. And an example we were just talking about beforehand is, often borrowing from the innovators, the west coast of the US, looking that way. We were speaking to Michael Marks, who's the CEO of Katerra in the US, who many of you may know. So formed in 2015, now valued at over $4 billion. Michael spent his career buying and building company in electronics manufacturing. His whole team, his whole leadership team is built from Flextronics, and bringing that capability and then meshing it with deep property, deep development expertise. That's what's happening in our industry today, and that's the big learning I think we can take from outside.
Nicole, do you have some time?
Yeah, just a point on for both of you, actually. I think, Barry, your point about comparing a property market with Formula One is valid. However, I think there's a really big difference there, and that is, correct me if I'm wrong, they don't have to make a profit. Whereas, fortunately or unfortunately, property developers have to make a profit. And that also goes for the bigger developers who are doing the modular, is that it might be cost effective for them to adopt those sorts of strategies. But we need to see a lot more of these larger developers, the big house builders, implement and utilize that technology so that it then becomes viable for the smaller ones, like us, the small house builders, which are typically defined as under 350 units a year. At the moment, none of this technology is viable for us because we need to turn a profit. Yeah. So that to me is, it's great to have these ambitious and audacious targets, but how can we actually make it work?
Yeah. Just coming back on that quickly, I think it's often a kind of perception from outside that it's this kind of circus and a jamboree and there's an unlimited amount of money. But actually they're really technology companies masquerading as a sport. And they do actually have to make a profit, otherwise they can't stay on the grid, they can't stay in business. So in order to get paid a reasonable amount of money in that business, you need A, sponsorship, and B, you get paid for winning and coming in the top 6 or 10. To get to those positions, you actually need to invest heavily in technology and win, or otherwise sponsors won't attract you. So there is a huge profit element actually, and it is similar in that those guys set the targets to achieve in 9 months. Our targets might be in 4 years' time, but we can accelerate the development of that to say 3 years or 2 years in order to try and bring cash in more quickly, in the same way that the F1 guys are just trying to win more quickly. So there are quite a few parallels, albeit that the timescales are quite different.
Yeah, and you're allowed to lose money for a little while, whereas we can't lose money on any development. We have to make money on every single one, or we don't exist anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But in F1, you probably can't lose money for more than a couple of years, or you'll find yourself really out of pocket, and a lot of these guys just disappear.
How does micro-living, Barry, so you and I work with Manchester projects looking at micro-living, challenging the London standards, housing standards. How could that come into play in terms of pushing the boundaries?
I think with the micro-living stuff, and we've got a couple of micro-flats in our office that we're continually trying to innovate around. The way we think about micro-living is to harness the best creative talents in order to solve the housing problems that are evident not only in the southeast but increasingly in other regions. So we have pretty audacious goals around trying to bring the best minds onto that problem, and to the extent that we actually have it in our office, and we're continually innovating and challenging the norms around what does a microflat actually look like.
I do struggle a little bit with the idea that micro-living is a solution to the housing market, though. If one of the only solutions is that we must get smaller and smaller, and that people can only live in smaller units, then that really does tell you a hell of a lot about how screwed the housing market is in this country. I think for me, I'm more interested, our business is interested, I think politicians should be more interested in how we allow people to buy the homes that they need to live in, rather than compromising and squeezing into smaller flats.
That's an interesting point, Steve. I mean, a lot of the way we design buildings is based on codes, based on code practice, which are built up over years. Some are outdated, some are old.
Most are outdated.
Nowadays, we're getting sensors put into buildings. How can we learn from real-time data that we're taking back from properties out there to change the way we design buildings in the future?
Well, I think post-occupancy evaluation is a very important thing to look at, because we can theorise as much as we like through the design process about how great these buildings are going to be and how wonderfully well these apartments are going to operate and how much they're going to affect people's lives for the positive. But until people have actually lived in them and understood them and worked with them, then it's all just theorising. So it's something we're looking into a hell of a lot at the moment. We've only just started completing our first few schemes. We will be doing post-occupancy evaluation on our schemes to see how these homes have worked for people, and that ties into some of the stuff you were saying. I think there's another point I wanted to pick up on modular housing and how can this technology how can these sorts of technologies work for smaller developers, and there is a challenge in there as well around. Okay, modular is great. Everybody loves talking about modular housing. It's very popular with journalists, very popular with politicians at the moment. It's one of the solutions, potentially. Does the market have enough capacity to really make a dent in the housing needs of this country? And when we as a developer look at our schemes, which are high-density, high-rise schemes, we look at the risk in there, and the risk of that modular contractor being there to complete the project, and what happens if that modular contractor falls over halfway through, and who's out there to step into their shoes. If you ask one modular contractor whether they'd step into another modular contractor's shoes, they will say no, so why should I contract with you? And that is something which these sorts of technologies, modular technologies, need help with, and if the government wants to push this, then they need to sit behind the modular companies.
The Slido's going mad. Giles, over to you. We've got a question.
Let me pick that one, because balance sheet is obviously a question that we get asked all the time, and you look at the Katera example I talked about. They raised 825 million from SoftBank, largely for balance sheet, because we recognise as developers, without certainty and security on the balance sheet, the industry will not move, will not adopt. So I think that is clearly something that we've got to do. It's certainly where we've come at this from. This is an industry that does not make sense at 50 or 100 or even 500 units per year. What we need to see and what we need to support from the government, and we're in open dialogue with Homes England, with the GLA, with a lot of groups of local authorities around these investments, but is material investment, tens, hundreds of millions, to build that capability and give the established industry the confidence to back these technologies. So I completely agree with that. We'll only see the capacity when we make the investment to put it there in the first place.
Steve, there's a question also from Mr. Shy, who's just dropped off, about, there we go, with recent reports stating that there's more than 14 billion developable roof space in London. What are the best ways to unlock value? You talked about regeneration projects.
Yeah.
Is there kind of...
I just wanted to pick up on one point here that sits hand in hand with exactly what you were saying. The smart home technology, the really important part of that for me is making sure that people who live in these homes actually know how to use it all. And it's that education process, and it's making sure that you're not selling to somebody who's then renting out to somebody else who doesn't know how that technology works. So really simple things that we've started doing in our schemes. Rather than giving people a massive pack of stuff and saying, read that before you try and use your home, we're putting little tags on the stuff which stay there.
Well, they have to be intuitive, don't they?
Yeah, this is how you use your tech. Read this before your flat overheats and you just open the window to let the heat out.
No one reads instructions ever, do they?
Small tags, yes. Massive packs of stuff, no. But there's no point in filling up homes with tech and then just assuming that everybody's going to know how to do it.
An earlier panel in the commercial sector talked about calm technology which just moves into the background and we're not even aware of it happening. Perhaps that's what we are starting to see happening with things like Alexa, which have become quite normal. My two little boys are already using it and shouting at the radio. What
That
things
really
that-
spooky Channel
It is a
4
little
advert
spooky,
as
it's a
well,
little
which is, yeah.
What other things like that in terms of lighting or heating or even things like online doctors? Being able to go to the toilet and had taken urine samples straight out of the toilet.
Lovely.
Are we seeing those kind of things come into the wants and needs of clients and tenants?
Not necessarily for us at the moment. We're sort of unashamedly mid-market, and it all comes down to whether you can afford to put this sort of stuff in the homes that you're delivering. We don't want to deliver really, really high-end homes, and we want to deliver homes that people from a range of price points are able to afford. So generally, we don't go for the really whizzy stuff.
Giles, did you want to?
Sorry, I'm itching on the edge of my chair around modular technology being available for SMEs. I think if you look at volume house builders, and I'm sure that's not what you guys are aspiring to be, but if you look at volume house builders, their costs are so good because they have 20 different house types, yeah? And they go again and again and again through those house types, and they've got a machine that makes them. One of the most exciting things for me about getting involved and investing behind the modular technology is what we're calling the democratization of house building. So Ilke Homes has a set of house types that anyone can use from, and we've got 6 sites in London with less than 10 units per site, and they work. They're much, much more viable than a traditional model for a whole number of different reasons. And we're talking to SMEs specifically about that. We had the Federation of Master Builders, we had Brian Berry and a team of his members at our demonstration site at East London talking directly about how do we engage with that market. So I would say to the SMEs here today in your network, help us understand how we can work with you. What's difficult for us as a manufacturer, as a scale builder, is how do we manage efficiently those communications for those smaller sites, for those planning applications, for the support that you need. So we're very much looking to engage with the SME business.
And you were talking about customization and personalization of the designs you're putting out, Giles. What can we see in your products at the moment which allows people to interface and create their own space?
Yeah, look, I think a house is built through our manufacturing process in 8 days. So that's eight days of work, 208 tasks per house, all codified and mapped out into time-bound, chunks of work. That means that, someone was talking about the conveyancing process before. I've bought and sold 3 houses in the last year, and I think I've not had one day where I've not been in that process. So what's that, 4 months each? Well within inside that conveyancing process, you can specify and design our homes. So we have platforms, of course. It's not ultimately, configurable to the nearest brick. But the differences of the layout, do you want an open plan house? Do you want the kitchen at the front? Do you want the kitchen at the back? Do you want a 3-bed with a study room, or do you want an open 2-bed with ensuite? All of that can be done within the process. And I think that's genuinely different and new and not hugely more complicated for the manufacturing process, which is very different, we know, to traditional.
There's a comment about rogue landlords beware of tech-enabled buildings and properties. Because if you can go into a building now and you can check your U value, your J value, your G value, your air humidity, the daylighting, do we need to be careful with PRS where actually there might be like TripAdvisor or things like that where you actually start rating those kind of buildings? We haven't seen that yet. I don't think we've seen it, but would that change the way we design?
There's one coming. There is one for PRS, and it's about time. Yeah, I think there's a lot of PRS investors and institutional investors, brands out there that are promising a very good game. It would be interesting to see how they judge.
And it's definitely happened in the US in the condos for many, many years. Perhaps not with apps, because when I lived there, there were no such thing as apps. However, you would definitely have forums that you would go to and discuss a certain building and discuss whether the concierge worked properly and whether the maintenance was responsive. So yes, it's definitely something that will help, especially in these large condo PRS type schemes.
And in this world of sort of instant write-ups, it's incredibly important to developers that moment when something breaks and somebody gets really, really pissed off, that doesn't stay on Twitter forever. it needs to be.
The testing period of the feasibility study of a new housing development, and you're thinking about a mixed desire for 100, 200, 500 units, it can be quite a slow process going from day one, testing it, going to market, getting feedback from landlords and agents, and then maybe trying to change that mixed desire. Are you seeing the use of things like residential spatial optimizers, which I know in Arup we've been developing a couple, to actually try and speed up that process and give you some real-time decision making?
Nope.
Nope. So there's an opportunity there potentially. Moving on to construction, there's a question here about construction robotics and things. Additive manufacturing, 3D printing, construction robotics, can you see that as a disruptor in the future in the way we deliver more value? Speed up the way we build buildings? We talked, I think, on the previous panel, there was a plastic brick got thrown around.
Yeah, I'm not sure about plastic brick, especially in the UK. I mean, you know, we like our bricks, so I don't see us moving away from that. But if you look at the Netherlands, for example, there are already brick slip conveyors that will lay out your brick slips, and then your pointing is done afterwards, for example. So that already exists, and I think that sort of technology is back to that manufacturing versus construction piece. That sort of technology is really difficult to implement when you're trying to do it across 5,000 sites. If you bring that technology into a controlled environment, into a temperature controlled, humidity controlled environment, then you're going to see it. I mean, it's inevitable. When I look at how we're building our ilke homes today versus how we could build them with technology that exists and is being used, that's where we get really excited about the future cost benefit, the future viability, frankly, return on investment that we're putting in.
Steve, we're going to go back to Mr. Shy/Grumpy's question about maximising the space which is available, and maybe using data to find those spaces. In terms of regeneration, how do we find the roof spaces which are available to develop on? Or open air spaces, or kind of...
We've done about a dozen of them over the last few years, and we're building out about 4 right at this moment, and they were properties that were identified by estate agents and brought to us. But yes, it's definitely a major way of meeting the housing shortfall, but it comes down to planning, and it's a planning issue, and it's about trying to work with boroughs to encourage them to be collaborative rather than have this us versus them type attitude, and to be open to developing on these buildings and allow for the maximum development on top of buildings, which is aesthetically pleasing as well as engineeringly possible, of course. But again, that comes down to the planning block that is in place. And again, for small developers like myself, it's very, very difficult to work with the planners when there is this attitude, and it costs a lot of money for us to do that in time, in holding time with these properties and interest cost, etc. And so there does need to be a lot more collaboration with planners and perhaps automation of the planning process as well.
Yeah, and you touched on the lightweight materials. We talked about CLT. We talked about. I don't know if you can jump in there. Steve.
Yeah, well, I kind of wanted to jump in on the rooftop development stuff as well, because interesting example of a scheme we delivered in North Acton. Where we were one of the first schemes on site there, so we built to a certain height, and then by the time we got about halfway up the building and we had, sorry, my alarm's going off, and we'd completed the frame, several more applications had gone in for much taller buildings. So we actually did a rooftop development on top of the scheme that we were building at the same time. And the way we're able to do that is by understanding the engineering, understanding the structural engineering aspect of things, testing the piles, reducing the factor of safety in the piles, because we understood what was going on in that, and then prefabricating 3 floors of the building that we were actually building at the time in Ireland out of lightweight steel. We built that 2 weeks of floor and threw that up another 21 flats on the top of this building. So it is possible, but it's about being nimble and about understanding quite a lot of the technical side of what you're doing.
Often the data's not there, is it? I mean, you're looking at 1930s, 40s, 50s building stock, which is everywhere in London. How can we solve that for the 2050, 2060, 2070 in terms of using BIM and embedding the right data in our buildings? Are you starting to see that, or is that just too far away?
We're starting to see BIM. We have a lot of discussions about BIM and about whether we should have that from the start, and whether the institutional investors that take some of our PRS stock would be interested in that. I think it's incredibly important for building owners to understand how the hell their buildings are put together and what the opportunities are for future adaptation and rearrangement. You need to know where the soft spots are. You need to know how to knock this building about in the future, because things will change. And a really good way of doing that is by using BIM from the start. So you use it from the start for clash detection, for understanding where everything goes and making sure everybody's on, everything's in the right place at the right time. But then you use it as a management tool, and you use it as a record for future fiddling around.
I think, James, we're up, that's our time done. So thank you very much, everyone, for sitting with us. I hope we answered as many of your questions as possible. And I think everyone's around 15 minutes afterwards.